Today we have Dr. Ginny Radesky, who is an assistant professor in Developmental Behavioral Pediatrics here at University of Michigan's Medical School. She received her MD from Harvard Medical School and trained in pediatrics at Seattle Children's Hospital and completed fellowship training in Developmental Behavioral Pediatrics at Boston Medical Center. Her research interests include the use of mobile technology by parents and young children, and how this relates to child self-regulation, parent mental health, and parent-child interaction. And her clinical work focuses on developmental behavioral problems in low-income and underserved populations, family advocacy, parent-child relationship difficulties, and the autism spectrum disorder. And she was also recently lead author of the 2016 American Academy of Pediatrics policy statement on digital media use in early childhood. So let's welcome Dr. Radesky.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for having me. It's very cool for me as a pediatrician to get to interface with folks that do this sort of computer engineering and computer interaction work that I only admire from a distance. So I'm excited to be here. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose. I always just have that slide. I don't know if you know that. But so I want to start off by saying as a pediatrician, a lot of people assume that I'm coming into this research with kind of a negative bias towards technology and its effects on child development. And I've been actually really strongly influenced by Rich Lang's work, and he's worked a lot with Scott Campbell in the School of Communication, just about how, what these introduction of novel technologies means in terms of the way families feel, in terms of feeling overwhelmed or anxious about the disruption that's happening in the norms and usual behaviors that are happening in their households. I came, upon this specific work where Lynn was talking about this balance between how at first we feel a lot of technologic determinism when new technologies come in, basically how technology-specific affordances and design shape our behavior, but how after time, as we accommodate to new technologies, we start to have more human determinism in terms of how we choose to design and use technology to meet our values and needs. So the kind of overarching approach that I take towards this subject of digital technology and child development is that with these new technologies, we just really need to know how to use them as tools to effectively help support early relationships in child development. And that's I'm going to focus on where my research so far has suggested might be intervention points. So I also want to acknowledge, though, that I came into this field of digital technology and child health and development with a whole background of research that was really informed by the old, more medical conceptual model about media use. Media use is seen as a public health risk factor, that it is something that, when used to excess, is associated with higher risks of obesity, of cardiovascular disease, of sleep problems, of school difficulties, ADHD, developmental delays, and these are all things that have been suggested by large population-based studies performed in the US and other countries that have looked at links between pretty crude measures of media use, such as total daily duration of use, and these different health indicators. They've tried to reduce all the confounding by social status and socioeconomic status, which is a huge confounder of links between media and health outcomes. But basically, this is often what the paradigm is when you talk to a medical physician about media and how to change it as a modifiable risk factor for health outcomes. And then there's also, getting a little past total daily duration and looking more at content. There have been tons and tons of studies looking at inappropriate, adult-oriented content or violent content and how that is linked to child aggressive behavior and executive functioning deficits in early childhood. So I still kind of felt as an early researcher in this area during my fellowship that these still felt like kind of crude measures of how media is used, and that I really, really liked some of the work being done by communications studies experts, sociologists, and others in this field who are outside of the medical field that really, they don't see it just as, I think what the medical model was looking at is that just here, media use leads to media health effects. And really, it's so much more complicated than that. I'm really interested in general about how children's individual characteristics affect their health outcomes. They affect how we parent them. They affect how teachers react to them. They affect what sort of media they prefer. And so I have focused a lot of my research on how these developmental or personality characteristics or behavioral characteristics are associated with how kids use media and parents use media. And then I'm also really interested, not a lot of my research has looked at this yet, but what are the response states? How are we responding emotionally to media? How are we getting aroused by media, and how that might affect downstream health effects? The last thing I'm really interested in is, this is a transactional model. This isn't just unidirectional. The downstream media effects then feedback onto parent or child traits, which again will feed on itself bidirectionally. So my purpose of showing this is that I've been trying to approach digital media use in early childhood by trying to examine it from a more complicated, more nuanced approach, looking at individual characteristics and response states. I mean, my whole medical and pediatric training has really focused on how children develop within the context of relationships. That from birth, children are interacting with their caregivers, with their teachers, and that their own characteristics, whether it's their temperament, maybe it's a biological vulnerability from being born prematurely, maybe it's the effect of some traumatic exposures that they have. Those characteristics then shape the way parents and caregivers react to them. I'm sorry, it says maternal here. I would like to change that to parent characteristics because my husband's a stay-at-home dad. But then how that parent responds or caregiver responds to the child then continues to shape the child's development and behavior, which in turn goes on to shape the way the parent reacts to them. So we have this transactional bidirectional model between parent and child. And my overall kind of overarching model is that we need to study how digital media interacts with parenting, with the parent's characteristics, with the parent's response states, and the parent's responses to the child. And also study how digital media interacts with the child's traits, because both of these things, the parenting responses and the child traits, are both what affect downstream child development outcomes. And when I talk about child development outcomes, I know that sounds vague. I'm interested in everything from, how they are regulating their emotions when they're under stress. I'm interested in how they maintain attention and are able to, stay on one task over time, how they resist distractions, how they make friends and connect with other people socially. So all these different aspects of development, including their cognitive and language development, are shaped by both the child's traits and parenting responses. And I care about this in early childhood because this chart shows when the brain areas that control our sensory pathways, our language pathways, and our higher cognitive function pathways, when these synapses are forming and then retracting. So the burst of this is happening even prenatally to the first year of life, and then kind of within the first 5 years of life is when you have the most of the synapses laid down regarding higher cognitive functions like executive functioning, impulse control, self-regulation. So investing in this in the first 5 years of life is most likely to have a beneficial effect on child's trajectories over time. This is a slide from the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard, which is very focused on how toxic stress, meaning things like poverty, homelessness, food insecurity, affect child developmental outcomes, and how that goes on to affect health over the life course. So you could see that the source of resilience in most of these kids is going to be supportive relationships, stimulating experiencing, health-promoting environments. And I'm really interested in how digital media can be used, not only turn it off, but also how it can be used as ways to support early relationships and give children more meaningful experiences when they're interacting with technology. Because clinically, I am seeing lots of kids in Ypsilanti, lots of kids from around the Ann Arbor area who are growing up in poverty, who are growing up in really stressed households. And I would love for their media use to be something that is positively affecting their curiosity, their task persistence, their social skills, rather than becoming just this, hole that they're diving into because they're frustrated in school. And I think that we also feel in pediatrics, there's this sense of urgency of why we need more research on it, because every time it's studied, the prevalence of ownership and usage of mobile devices and novel technologies by young kids is just increasing exponentially. So these are just examples of the Common Sense Media. It does different surveys, kind of on an every 2-year basis of how young children are using media. And you can see that it's been, as of 2011, only 10% of children under 2 had ever used, not even owned, used a mobile device, and only 38% of children under 8. By 2013, that was increasing, but nowhere near as universal as it is now. And then in 2015, there was a publication showing that in a low-income clinic in Philadelphia, they surveyed parents of kids under 4, and 97%, so it was almost completely saturated, that kids had access to mobile devices, and 75% owned their own device. Parents are spending hours of their day on mobile technology as well. So that's where, with this rapidly evolving technologic environment, there is this sense of urgency and anxiety within families, within pediatricians on how best to use it and how not to just feel overwhelmed by it. And that's kind of, to go back to Lang's model to begin with, of how we can start to feel less controlled by the onslaught of new technologies and feel like we're using it more for our own family's goals. So let me talk a little bit about some of the research that I've done about how technology might be shaping some of our family interactions, focusing first on digital media and parenting. So when I first wanted to study this, I was in fellowship in Developmental Behavioral Pediatrics. I was mostly practicing in a low-income urban clinic, and it was like 2011 when I started. I was really interested. I had just been practicing primary care in Seattle with a lot of Microsoft engineers who were the parents bringing in iPhones and iPads into the clinic rooms. And I was just fascinated by the changes in dynamics that were happening in our interactions. That I'd be saying, oh, I think this child has Coxsackie virus, and the parent would bring it up and search Coxsackie virus and have a conversation with me and the device, or sometimes more the device than me, about their child's illness. I was really interested in how this is a way that parents were managing their own distress about their child's sickness, about how they were managing their child's distress, a sick child playing with a video game so that they could keep calm and not be as upset when I looked in their ears. And so I was just fascinated by it. I thought that this seemed, now that mobile devices were so portable and so instantly accessible, it really seemed that it could potentially be changing interpersonal dynamics quite a lot. No one had studied this in pediatrics, no one had studied this in psychology. There had been some research on background television showing that it interrupted parent-child play. So I started to look a little bit more into the communications literature and the human-computer interaction literature to try and understand how does mobile technology seem to change human behavior. I found a few studies, lab-based studies, showing that interruptions from cell phones impair our cognitive processing. I found a few survey-based studies showing that compulsive texting or problematic phone use was associated with lower mindfulness in adults, that it tended to be driven by a need to regulate their emotions, like anxiety or boredom, which totally fit with what I had been seeing in the clinic in terms of parents, and still to this day, kind of when I'm having a tough conversation with a parent about an autism diagnosis or something else like that, it commonly comes up that a mobile phone will come out as a way to look up information or connect with someone. It's become kind of a habitual way now that we manage our emotions. And there was a growing literature on problematic phone use, or what people were calling internet addiction or cell phone addiction, which I don't use the term addiction, but I think that people were trying to examine what's going on with people who are using internet or mobile phones excessively, and how that really was linked in the literature with self-regulation deficits or mental health problems. And then there was literature from people like Sherry Turkle talking about mobile devices as this tether, this kind of thing that has us tied to outside obligations, but more empiric studies like Antti Alsperta out of Finland, who was showing that mobile devices are more likely to be used intermittently throughout the day. They're just kind of peppered throughout our day rather than being done in one chunk like we do with a TV or a laptop or desktop. So just interesting that this was becoming more pervasive. It started to become more of a habit for a lot of people. And no one had studied this yet with regard to parents. All of these were adults, and it makes complete sense that the same sort of cognitive, emotional, or habit-driven processes could be occurring with parents of young kids as they are with the rest of these studies. I also, had started to hear in the popular press about the debates between people like Nir Eyal and Tristan Harris about how digital products are created in order to, have persuasive types of behavioral effects on their users, how to create habits and engagement. And so this, again, I was trying to kind of fit this into my conceptual model of how the design of the tech itself might interact with a parent's characteristics in order to influence what happens between a parent and a child when a parent is using technology around their kid. So overall, I kind of came up with these hypotheses that I wanted to start testing. I really was curious whether a parent mobile device could influence parent-child interaction through a couple different mechanisms. Could it be changing parent attention regulation or their ability to kind of analyze child behavior in the moment while they're also trying to, toggle their brain between that and their own whatever, heavy cognitive demand is going on their mobile device. I was curious what effect it might have on parent emotion regulation. We got a lot of bad news and arousing news through our mobile devices, and now that we have access to that all the time, what effect is that having on the way we then emote around our kids? Similar to the background TV literature, I was interested in how it might be displacing other family routines. Use at the dinner table has become a commonly, something that people commonly warn against, just so that we're not distracted from the emotional connection that should happen there. And I was also interested in what it does to parent-child conversations, since as a developmental pediatrician, I care a lot about how kids learn conversational skills, that they're able to take someone else's perspective, know when it's their turn, build off of someone else's ideas, rather than just always sticking with their own ideas. And I don't think that this is just a mobile device is, impairing parent-child relationship. As simple as that. All of this is transactional and bidirectional. So I was curious about how parent technology use might influence the parent's emotional response or child behavior, but also interested on how the child's behavior might be influencing parent mobile device use habits. Because I certainly know that when I need a break from parenting, I just kind of go and check Facebook and try and connect with my adult friends. So these were kind of the thoughts going through my head as I started this series of studies. So the first thing we did was to try and gather some preliminary evidence about how parents were using technology around kids. Now, the purpose of this study was actually also to see how kids were using technology during meals. We just didn't see much of it, so it wound up being a publication primarily about how parents were using mobile technology. We did naturalistic observations during meals. We just wanted to describe patterns. This was not a hypothesis-driven study. It was meant to be hypothesis-generating. So we went into fast food restaurants. We went to McDonald's, Panera, Chipotle, Burger King. We went all around the Boston area trying to get a good sampling of ethnic and socioeconomic neighborhoods. And we just did these anonymous, non-participant observations. This is an anthropologic method that's been used to just study novel cultural phenomena. And we felt like this is such a loaded topic. We did not want to go in with like a checklist of like, cell phone, yes. Tantrum, yes. Like we really wanted to go in and say, what is happening? What should we be looking for? What should we be asking about when mobile devices come out during meals? We chose fast food restaurants. I know that they're a rush meal. They're not representative of what happens in your home, but it is a really, really easy way to study public behavior. And this is ethically okay because we're not collecting any data on the actual individuals that we were seeing. We didn't write down any names. So of the 55 families that we did these in-depth, like each of these observations was like 20 minutes. It was like me or my research assistant sitting down just taking constant notes on everything that was happening during that family's meal. Devices were pretty common. We didn't only choose to watch families who had a device out. Sometimes they sat down, nothing was visible, and a device came out, or it didn't during the course of the meal. We just watched whoever was closest to us and who wouldn't feel creeped out by having someone looking at them during their meal. So a lot of devices were out, but there was a chunk of them, 18 parents, who we called, were just really, really absorbed in their device. And we came up with this term absorption through qualitative analysis of the field notes. We just read them over and over. We had people from different backgrounds, academic backgrounds, reading these field notes to try and see what common themes were coming up. And we kept seeing parents who were just kind of looking at their device, bringing it out either at the beginning of the meal or when they were done eating, but the kids were still eating, and then it was just kind of constant. No change, very little change in affect on the part of the parents, very little parent-child conversation when that happened. Parents seemed to take longer to respond to children's bids for attention, and there were lots of episodes of conflict, which we thought was really surprising for the fact that we only watched 55 families. We were not looking for conflict. We just sat next to whoever was around. And so we saw a bunch of parents raising their voice at their kids, kids trying to get their, escalating, trying to get their parents' attention. We saw parents getting physical with kids. One mom kicked her daughter under the table. Another parent shoved a boy's hands away when he was trying to lift her face from the iPad. And so we again, we actually kept meeting and saying, we need to find more positive. We were afraid that this one was going to be interpreted as if we were looking for all these negative episodes. So we actually started to, towards the end, look for parents and kids who were using more mobile devices together. And that was really rare to find. We only found it 4 times when they were watching a video or taking pictures together. It's also worth noticing, though, noting that there was the rest of parents who did use a mobile device were just had it on the table or texted every once in a while. It was did not appear to be a disruptive thing. But of course, when this was covered by the press, that there was no mention of the fact that a mobile device on the table is not particularly disruptive to parent-child interaction. This was very focused on all the negativity. So knowing that this was a hypothesis-generating, very small preliminary study, we then wanted to try to quantify parent-child interaction during mobile device use. And we wanted it to be spontaneous mobile device use, not something that we have people come into a lab and we say, use your mobile device, and then we'll try and get you to interact with your kids. So this happened to be here at U of M, this cohort study called the ABC Feeding Study. It's a study of, longitudinal study of stress and obesity and how parents and kids eat, their eating styles. So they had this videotaped standardized eating protocol where moms and kids were about 5, were given 4 different plates of food every 4 minutes, and they videotaped and coded how they interacted around things like a Hostess cupcake versus canned green beans. And it was such a boring task that I think it was 23% of moms brought out their cell phone during the task and just used it. And so what we did was we coded which moms were actively using their mobile device, and then we looked at how many verbal interactions, nonverbal interactions, and encouragements those moms had with their kids. So moms who used a mobile device use actively did have significantly fewer of all these types of interactions with their kids. It could be that these are moms that wouldn't necessarily interact a lot with their kids anyway, and the mobile device is just a marker. But it was interesting that because this study did things like measured parent depression, it measured parenting style, this was a pretty common behavior regardless of the mother's age, education level, parenting style, or depression symptoms. So we didn't think it was explained just by the fact that this is the way the mom would parent anyway. So after these 2 studies came out, I did some qualitative focus groups with parents because I really wanted their perspective on this. I'm a mom of a 7 and a 3-year-old. At the time I had an infant and a 5-year-old, and I really wanted to, I knew how tough it was for me to try to balance tech and parenting at home. So I recruited 35 caregivers from the Boston area, from everything from an inner city clinic to a tech company, to try and see how parents perceive this. What are they experiencing when they're using tech around their kids? What does it feel like? What are the pros? What are the cons? How can we think about it in order to think about whether it's worth addressing or worth making recommendations about. And the Bright Futures funding that I got for it, Bright Futures is the pediatric anticipatory guidance that, the guidelines for how we should, as pediatricians, advise parents at every checkup their child has. So parents had so much to say about this. They came in and they were like, thank you for holding this support group. And I was like, this is a research study. But it was, I mean, they're really fascinating conversations. Parents had a lot positive to say also in terms of like, especially the professional parents about work-life balance. But the parents, especially the lower income parents, had a lot of negativity to say about how intrusive they felt like this was. The idea that they're just constantly barraged with information, with news, with notifications to feed their chickens or whatever game they're playing, that they were getting a sense that, you know, my ex-boyfriend never had access to me in the middle of dinner before, and now he does, and that just creates this whole, you know, sense of intrusion and arousal that wouldn't have happened before if I didn't have this device on. Parents talked about times when there was like, they ran out of data, or there was a blackout, or they needed to get an Obama phone, and it was a relief because they didn't have access to Facebook or their games because they just had like a regular phone. But at the same time, they were talking about like, I am homeless, I have a dad who's sick all the time, this is my lifeline. So a lot of tensions around how this is now a necessity, it's how I bank, it's my lifeline, and it's also this just source of too much information and too many social demands. But you know, many stay-at-home moms talked about like, this is my social support, this is how I take a break and connect with the outside world and remember that there are like logical adults out there. They really talked, a lot of moms who worked from home said how hard it was to toggle between work mode and child mode, and to be kind of very task-oriented versus emotionally available. And then there was also just a new sense of pressure, a new sense of expectation from employers, from managers, from friends that wasn't there before, that everyone just felt like they were trying to accommodate to. And so this really helped us understand like how to empower parents to carve out some time for themselves, for some boredom, for some time with their kids where they don't feel these constant pressures and being pulled in different directions. And then I just have this study that we're putting together now, which I think is, you know, as many people have critiqued this work, they've said, okay, so you've a couple studies showing that heavy parent technology use might affect the way parents respond to kids. It might affect their sensitivity or the amount of interactions they're having. Does this actually matter for child development outcomes? Maybe it's a stress reliever for parents. Maybe it's good in the long run for kids to have parents who are more connected to their friends or to their work. So to help answer this question, I've been working with a family studies PhD who's now at Illinois State, and he did this study where he recruited online 183 couples. So it had to be cohabiting couples with children 1 to 5 years old, and he's followed them through multiple data waves for 6 months. And the parents reported on this scale that he developed around the frequency and type of devices that interrupt activities with their child. Like how, on a usual day, how many times do you use this type of device during an activity with your child, such as playing or eating or things like that. So it's self-report. We don't know how accurate it is, but it's, you know, it's very focused on parent-child activities, not other times of the day. And then parents completed the child behavior checklist, which is a standardized scale of externalizing and internalizing symptoms. And so this is kind of a lot of numbers, but it shows that basically, this is what I think is fascinating. You have a difficult child at baseline, a lot of externalizing symptoms. They have lots of tantrums, they hit, they yell, they just externalize their emotions. That small but significant correlation with the degree of parenting stress and how much technology they use during parent-child activities. So this tells me, you have a tough child, it stresses you out, you probably withdraw a little bit from parent-child activities into your device because it helps you calm down. It's maybe just helps you kind of avoid the uncomfortable interactions that you're having with your kid. Now, the opposite direction though, technology interference, smaller but still significant longitudinal associations with later child externalizing behavior. So is it good to work out with your parenting stress? Probably not. It's probably a pretty small effect size. I think what's important here though is that just saying to parents, you have to turn off your devices. If they're doing it for a functional purpose, because it's helping them calm down and manage stress, we have to deal with the upstream issues of having a tough child and the fact that in this country we don't have great mental health supports for early childhood, and we don't have great insurance coverage for it, and our parents are stressed because they're working really hard. So I think that this helps us understand just where to intervene if we're interested in allowing parents to have more time where they can really connect with their kids and have good play, parent-child interaction experiences. Now, this is the stuff that I've been working on with Mark Newman and Stanley Chang, who's now in Taiwan, that I think I'm excited about because all of these things that include self-report or that include videotaping, we have no idea what the parent is doing on the device, and this is a 15-minute video. We don't know what they're doing through the course of their day. And so what I'm really interested in is how parents are using their mobile devices throughout the day. So I've been lucky enough to have Mark and Stanley let me use Manuku just basically to do app tracking on parents' Android devices. So right now we've recruited 20 parents of young kids, and they use Manuku for 2 weeks. And they fill out some questionnaires about their parenting stress, about their child's behavior, about their depression symptoms. We're just trying to understand, number one, we just wanted to pilot this and see if parents would be okay with us tracking their mobile devices, which they totally are. It's been really easy to use and easy to install, uninstall. And then once we get the data, I've been trying to see, like, this is, for example, how parents are using, like, their total duration of mobile device use and their checking frequency by time of day. I just split these into arbitrary times of days because, like, this is usual morning routine with young kids. This is a usual kind of dinner time, evening routine with young kids. And you can see there is a dip right around this time that's like high intensity parenting time. And then like kids go to bed and woo, we're on our devices. So it's like, I just want to use this to be a little bit more precise about how parents are using their technology throughout the day. And also we have the ability to look at how the app usage. So again, I'm less sure about how to use the app usage output and thinking about it a couple different ways to use it. I'm excited to start using this on children's tablets because I'm really curious the way kids with different temperaments, kids from different socioeconomic backgrounds are using, what types of apps they're using, the quality of the apps they're using, how frequently they're switching between different apps and things like that, how focused they're staying on apps or whether they're streaming videos. So, this mom was a high Facebook user, and you can see that she wasn't using a lot of Facebook during dinner time, so great. But it's, again, I don't know exactly what this means. I don't have any hypotheses about what different types of app usage would imply for parenting, but it's more of an exploratory thing right now. So we have about 15, 20 minutes, so I'm just going to run through a few of the studies I've done on how child traits interact with how they use technology, and then talk about the AAP recommendations that I had a hand in. So I was kind of driven crazy by a bunch of the studies that had looked at longitudinal associations between media exposure in early childhood with later language development problems, ADHD, and executive functioning. Because in clinic, I was seeing all these kids with self-regulation problems, attention problems, behavior problems, and their parents were like, be quiet, take your tablet. And so I really felt like media use is a functional response that we have, a parenting response we have to try and help control our kids' behavior. And no one was looking at it from that direction. Everyone was looking at what does media do to child behavior, and I really wanted to say, are there different kids who might benefit from media differently than others, or who might have more of a detriment from certain media use practices. So again, like I had said about this transactional model that really focuses on what the child brings to the table. Everything had just been media use to child developmental effects. And I really wanted to look at this question of what's going on upstream. So my first study on this, I used this old data set. The kids were born in 2000, so it had no mobile device use measures. It was all TV and videos. But basically, it had a great measure of infant self-regulation problems. These kids that I categorized as difficult were 9-month-olds and 2-year-olds who were crappy sleepers, just could not soothe themselves, reacted really intensely to any frustration. So kids who just are tough little cookies to parent. And we found that those kids were more likely to exceed the AAP duration of screen time guidelines of 2 hours per day. I'm air quoting because I don't love that outcome, but it was what we had in this huge national data set of 7,000 kids. So that was the first thing. Well, maybe these kids are tough to parent and we need to support the parents more instead of just, or giving them ideas of really good content for their kids to watch so that they're benefiting from this higher level of media use that they may be having. So to test whether this association sticks with mobile device use, we did this small cross-sectional study when I was still at Boston Medical Center of 144 low-income caregivers of toddlers. And we basically asked them to fill out some standardized questionnaires about their child's social emotional development and their parenting. And then we asked them a few questions about how they use mobile media with their toddler. And so toddlers who were delayed in their social emotional development, meaning these are kids who have really intense emotion reactions, more tantrums, trouble sharing, they were 2.7 times more likely to be given a mobile device to calm them down when they're upset. They're 3.6 times more likely to be given a mobile device when the parent wants peace and quiet in the house. But no differences in mobile device use while eating, while in public, on transportation, or at bedtime. So again, this is cross-sectional, so it could be that mobile devices are making kids crankier, but my suspicion is it's more that we have tough kids, and this is a very effective tool for keeping them quiet or getting them to calm down. And I see it all the time in clinic with 3- and 4-year-olds who have the beginnings of ADHD, and this is kind of how the parents stay sane. So again, we don't know whether this is good or bad in the long term. Maybe this is reducing the amount of conflict in the home, and that's good in the long run for parent-child relationships. And I think it really depends on content. What are they watching? What are they using when they're calming down? So, and how is the parent supporting them around that time of calming down? So that's what we need a lot more information for. So the key points of the research I've been just doing for the past couple of years is just that, we have some preliminary data that parent technology use, when it's heavy, when parents are really absorbed, is associated with lower quality and quantity of parent-child interactions. We don't yet know how that happens throughout the day. Is it happening through home meal times? Is it happening, what actually is going on when that happens? But we have to take the perspective of parents, that they're feeling really pulled in by technology and society's demands and how things are changing so rapidly. And they're using technology functionally to manage their stress, to manage their child's emotional distress. And we need to take that into account when we're thinking of how to give advice. And parents really want help with this, at least from my focus group. So this is how I've kind of tried to focus the AAP guidelines on being well, how do we use technology in the best way possible to meet some of these goals around parenting skills, around giving children better social and emotional outcomes. So let me run through a couple of these and what the research shows, why we chose these. So number one, we really need more dyad-based design, meaning that apps and shows like Sesame Street that are made to engage the parent as well as the child. So TV used to be this main family social activity where we all sat around one set, and now it's a very parallel activity. And so, and this matters because toddlers, in lab-based studies, toddlers between 15 and 30 months old don't learn from screen media very well unless they have a parent watching with them and repeating and saying, oh, look, that's a tree out there. And that's how they transfer cognitively from 2D to 3D. So they need that scaffolding from a parent. And there's some population-based evidence that low-income infants whose mom talked to them during media, even if they use a lot of media, those children have better language outcomes. So it does matter in terms of child outcome. But most apps, Kathy Hirsch-Pasek, who's a language developmental psychologist from Temple, they did this really great review of what apps are available in iTunes and the app stores. And most of them are not designed to engage both the parent and the child. And they're not designed to try and help the parent scaffold the child and apply the knowledge that they're learning on the app to the rest of the world around them. We really tried in the new AAP guidelines to focus more on using media as a tool for social connection. Skype is and video chat are perfect examples, and so there should be no limits on this, basically because they facilitate relationships. And toddlers as young as 24 months can actually learn words across contingent interactions over Skype. And infants as young as 16 months can show joint attention, like, here, look's my cup of milk. Do you want a sip of milk? So these are great examples of how kids can benefit and understand two-dimensional screen media. And tech products or media products like books have long been a scaffold for parents of like, how do I talk to my kid about moving? Oh my gosh, like I don't even know what to say. So I got a Berenstain Bears book about moving, and it gives you all this like good language that's very child appropriate. PBS and Sesame Workshop and Mr. Rogers have always been doing this, that when you sit down and watch one of these shows with your kids, you're like, oh, that's a great way to talk about what to do when you're frustrated. So apps really can be an emotional scaffold to give the parent an idea of what to do. If you Google Elmo Belly Breathe, watch that video. It's great for teaching a child what to do when they're feeling upset and learn how to take deep breaths. There's Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. I don't know if any of you are parents of young kids, but this is an evidence-based, when it's watched with parents, it improves child social emotional outcomes, because they all sing these songs, like, when you're feeling frustrated, take a step back and ask Rob. I won't sing the whole thing, but it gives you things to sing to your kids when they're feeling frustrated, and sometimes it works. And it's just a new way to help teach, explicitly teach kids about these tough things that they have to master in the first 5 years of life. But again, Mike Levine and Lisa Guernsey, who are both active from Sesame and the New America Foundation, they actually wrote a book in which they reviewed the 184 top-rated apps in the app stores and found they are crap. There's most of them had no input from developmental specialists. They taught extremely rote skills. So in the new AAP guidelines, we're very focused on picking apps. We specifically recommended PBS Kids and Sesame Workshop because they test their apps and they make sure that kids actually learn from them. There's also the bedtime app was written up in science because it was for first graders, and it prompts the first grader to have to ask their parent for help in working on the app. And so kids, when they did that, they learned first grade math skills, addition and subtraction skills better because they had some parent scaffolding. This is just an example of how Sesame takes child development theory and kind of breaks it down for kids into what do you do when you're feeling upset? You think of thought bubbles and then you pick a plan. With kids with autism, I do social story apps all the time so parents can help them create a story about what they're feeling and put it into pictures, because kids with autism are often visual learners, and then this one has them kind of breathe while it turns from red to blue. We use things like visual timers or visual schedules on apps all the time. I mean, this is how you use media as a tool to give you new parenting ideas. This is an app from 0 to 3 where it gives you boredom busters, or you're commuting. It gives you ideas of what to do with your kids in terms of play based on your child's age and what you want to teach them that are non-digital solutions to times that you might just hand your child your device. So this is the focus of the new AAP policy statement is we want parents to be role models for how we're using media around kids, because part of this teaching that we do about digital literacy is explicit. We talk about when we Skype with grandma, we look at her and we ask her what she thinks. When the kids get older, we talk with them about cyberbullying. We have these explicit conversations. But there's implicit role modeling. There's social learning just from watching us. So we're really encouraging parents to be reflective about their own tech use and be positive role models about how kids start to understand the meaning of new technologies as they come out. And so part of the concrete suggestions that we gave to parents is have some unplugged or no tech zones in your day or in your home. Choose them yourself, do what fits for your family, because we don't want there to be this one-size-fits-all AAP, not 2 hours of screen time per day. We really wanted it to be more nuanced. Like I said, we recommended high-quality digital products, especially for low-income families who kind of may just be letting their kid download whatever comes up on the App Store. We really want more shared media use with young kids, and we really emphasize there still needs to be a ton of hands-on, child-led, unstructured play, because that, the evidence shows, is still most important for school readiness and self-regulation and executive function. So we kind of said, parents, do that first, make sure you get that outdoor time, you get that hands-on play. We did specifically say don't use media as a way to calm kids down, because we really want kids to learn from parents and learn internally how to manage that distress and what to do with it. But we need more evidence to know whether using media as a calming strategy for everyday kinds of distress is detrimental. So more concrete things: no screens 1 hour before bedtime, have device curfews or do not disturb signs. Like I said, video chatting's fine. And then we did say that, you know, if you want to use media as young as 18 months, there's evidence that kids can learn from two-dimensional screens, but you have to use it with them, because that's how they actually transfer the knowledge to the rest of the world. And then we gave a bunch of different concrete resources that parents can use to look up what are the highest rated apps. I just used Common Sense Media this weekend to look up Pokemon. My son was so mad because they gave it a really bad rating. And so I didn't let him watch it. And so, you know, they said it was just really commercial and violent, and so we chose something else. But it does give you an idea, like, what is this show about, if I don't have time to watch it with him. So I'm happy to take questions. This is just my overarching model again is that there's enormous potential here in either direction: displacement, engagement, consumption, creativity, and I think what my focus is going to continue to be is on the early relationship and how we can design tech to really address, be compatible with the way kids learn best, and how to engage meaningfully with tech, but then take that knowledge to the rest of the world. Thanks.
You seemed to hesitate slightly when you said you recommended not using the screen to calm kids down. It seemed to not be consistent with what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, I think the reason I hesitate is that I have only done one study on that, and we really wanted to make these recommendations as evidence-based as possible because they're always criticized in the popular press. And so we decided to put that one in because it made a lot of conceptual and theoretical sense. But the AAP guidelines go through multiple rounds of editing, and every round of editing, people said, yes, I love this, keep it in, embellish it, like make sure that it's, make sure it's clear that we're not judging parents for like using a tablet on the airplane, or when your kid's getting an echocardiogram, or some other sort of moment of distress that it would be really helpful to distract them from. But if it's just every day you're whining in the car, there are other approaches that we can teach kids to learn how to manage boredom, how to manage limit setting, how to manage, just waiting, that are important to their long-term development. So I guess my hesitation is, I as a researcher want more evidence about that. But my other side as a policymaker is that we need to have very clear messages. And so we made it a clear message, even though I know we need more studies on it. Does that make sense?
I thought you had suggested that your intuition was even the opposite.
No, I'm trying to have some equipoise about it because I think that'll help me design my studies better. But I think that I think it's how you use it, right? So if you're using technology and you put up the Daniel Tiger Feelings app and you say, look, you're feeling frustrated. This is what Daniel Tiger does when he's frustrated. And as a parent, you kind of like hang out there with them and make it a teaching moment. Then that's facilitating skill building. And eventually you don't need that app anymore because you can just remind them with words. What would Daniel Tiger do? So I think that there's, when you're using it as a tool and you're scaffolding and then you're slowly removing the support, then that's, I think, where it could be an effective manager. If it's just a handback and a distraction from an emotion or what to do with boredom or distress, then I think my hypothesis is that it wouldn't be helpful in the long term.
know that there's some cases where parents are using devices as a replacement for themselves, like they're not available, they're not there, or just can't deal with deal with their kids in that moment. And so, do you see like recommendations for device use in that situation when the parent is not available, so they give a device to distract or occupy their child, and how does that affect?
I think that we mostly want parents to just be intentional about when they're intentional versus reactive about when they're using a mobile device to occupy their child, because or any technology. I mean like putting on a TV show so you can cook dinner. It's like totally valid practice. Like in clinic, when I'm having a tough conversation with a parent and a kid is like getting tired and stressed, like it's effective means of behavioral control to give them some videos to watch so that they don't have to listen to a tough conversation. So I think there are definitely appropriate uses of technology, and there's even been like blogs written about how like why should moms be this new parenting tool be taken away by this judgment, that it's not the right way to manage a child's behavior. And I think it just has its place, and that it's and I think there's less risk in just using it to occupy them because you have your hands full and you have to get other stuff done compared to it being used as like a calming strategy, like when you're at the playground, and I've actually seen this, and a child like falls and like stubs their knee, and the device comes out to help them calm down, rather than just like a hug and oh, that really hurts. Let's do something about it. So it's again, that's part of the habit forming part of how we start using new technologies.
So I think you spoke a lot about how we can use apps and to help with the development of children. Have you focused any of your research on how we can use apps more down, the management side? Like, let's say a kid was diagnosed with depression or an illness, and how that can help with how an app can help regulate and manage.
Yeah, I don't know as much of the literature on management of mood disorders in older kids, just because most of my clinical work is kind of 0 to 8, and that's what my research has been also. And a lot of the mood disorder management stuff that's been done online or through apps is it's interacting with a professional, or it's like building your insight into your own emotional state and what you can do about it and what led to that emotional state. And I think that requires a lot of insight and abstract reasoning on the part of the individual, whereas most of the kids I study are kind of before that sort of abstract reasoning or self-reflection. They're a little bit more reactive and in the moment, or just have early self-awareness. So most of the apps for emotion regulation that I've been interested in are really storytelling apps that tell the story of how Elmo managed his emotions, and that put in little nuggets of information for parents about how they can talk to their kids in the moment. Because one of the hardest things about a child tantrum is how you as a parent respond emotionally, and that you get upset and you think you're a bad parent and you yell at the kid and it escalates everything. So when parents can be given these little tools of okay, that's happening, that's what it means, I'm going to do this, and it kind of helps the child feel understood and helps them feel like my parents helped me figure out how to manage this. So that's where I think apps are helpful, is when they help teach the parent and child a little bit more about how to manage emotions and what they mean, and other issues like friendships, or there's plenty of other knowledge like science or reading that I didn't even touch on, that kids kind of 5 and above can benefit more from well-designed digital products. But so that's kind of the limits of younger kids in terms of how much they can reflect upon their emotional state.
Well, we're out of time, but let's thank Dr. Radesky.